All aboard, the 9:15 from Oakworth is now departing. My name is Paul Anthony Nelson, and I'm a film historian, filmmaker with Cinema Viscera, and film critic for Primal Screen, a radio show and podcast on Triple R FM in Melbourne, Australia, and I will be your kindly station master, taking you through this beautiful new Kino Lorber Blu-ray release of director Lionel Jeffrey's classic 1970 adaptation of E. Nesbit's 1906 novel, The Railway Children. And right there, we get the depth of the beautiful colours on this transfer. Colour is very important to this film, as we will discover throughout. So we have the adult Roberta, played by Jenny Agutter, going through a room of memory, almost. And this is a clever opening credit sequence that immediately puts us into the reverie of memory, not only evoking an affection for an England long past, but also foreshadowing the events to come throughout the film, arranged next to the actors' names. The zoetrope here, which creates this little animation, takes us back to the Edwardian era, where cinema was still in its infancy, and zoetropes were a much more common way for people to experience the magic of the moving image. And it's indeed a sense of magic that writer-director Lionel Jeffries is after here. The entire film and Nesbit's book are odes to the very real magic found in the everyday. So here we have, as I mentioned, items that will become important throughout the film under the names of the actor playing that character. So here, William Mervyn plays the old gentleman. We have his pen and notebook, pocketbook. We have Ian Cuthbertson, who plays father, and his red box from the Foreign Office. And of course, the names of the kids playing the children, and the very genteel kind of Miss, Mrs, Master, Mr before the names as well is a very sweet touch. But as the 3 pocket watches that the kids win are awarded for their bravery. And then there's a cheeky sense of humour going on here with these artefacts being arranged under the crew. So there's a stereoscope lens and photographs beneath the director of photography. There's a phonograph under the composer. There's writing materials under Lionel Jeffrey's writing credit. The producer has the complete stage. And then underneath Jeffrey's directorial credit, we have the puppets, the stage's performers, essentially signalling him as the film's puppet master, which is really cute.
Railway children to begin with. I don't suppose we ever thought about railways, except as a means of getting to the theatre and the zoo. We were just ordinary suburban children, and we lived with father.
This is Agutter setting the tone and taking us back to Edgecombe Villa, which is this tiling is insane. You'll notice as this sequence goes along, that green will be a recurring colour throughout the film and seems to show up primarily during happier times, or when the children have hope, or when there's a hint of hope. And here we are introduced to the Waterbury children upside down, almost through the looking glass. And their life is going to be turned upside down in many ways. So here is Jenny Agutter, who needs no introduction, playing Roberta, aka Bobbie. Here is Sally Thompson, who plays Phyllis. And Gary Warren, who plays Peter. It's now part of the film's legend that despite playing the youngest of the kids, Sally Thompson was actually 20 years old when she played this role, playing an 11-year-old. Agutter was 17 and Warren was 15 going on 16. Thompson's age was carefully under wraps, not only from the public but from the crew. She actually signed a contract that she and also Agutter signed a similar contract that they were not to be seen driving, going out or smoking during the shoot. So Thompson was a sports car loving adult who just bought herself a Lotus and that she wasn't allowed to drive while she was making the film. And recalls crew members soliciting Agutter's creative input after takes, but just giving Thompson sweets after a good take. So here is the family. We're just beginning to meet mother and father. Watching Peter Pan, something Dinah Sheridan, who plays mother, would know well, as one of her first professional gigs was playing Wendy and later Peter Pan himself. She was reportedly the first actress to play both roles in a travelling show across England for 3 years from 1934 to 1936. And Peter Pan is, of course, another literary product of Edwardian England, which was a bit of a boom time for children's literature. There's this and Pan and the Beatrix Potter's Peter Rabbit and A Little Princess and Wind in the Willows and The Secret Garden, all of which have been adapted time and time again. Now, there's a scene set at Christmas here. There's enough Christmas content in this film and also family generosity. And, of course, this is the family in better times at Edgecombe Villa, establishing their generosity to one another and their staff. But this has become a Christmas perennial in the UK. It was played at Christmas and at times at Easter as well. So this is Peter receiving his beloved engine, which is, of course, green. And the father here is played by Ian Cuthbertson, who was a veteran actor who started out as a radio journalist in Glasgow before going on to a long and successful film, TV and stage career. Spent 3 years as associate director of the London's Royal Court Theatre at one point, before guest starring on pretty much any British show you can think of from the 60s to the 90s. From The Avengers to Department S to Inspector Morse to Doctor Who. So that moment, there's this portent of doom. The kid's world explodes in a puff of smoke. It's almost like a magic trick. Peter's precious train blows up. The dog runs away. Their life is about to change. But Cuthbertson here also starred in the cult horror telemovie The Stone Tape, written by Nigel Neal. Was one of the main voices in the 80s animated series Supergran, which had a bit of a cult following. This was actually his film debut. He went on to star in Gorillas in the Mist for Michael Apted, Scandal for Michael Caton-Jones. Just saying, this is a really lovely framing device as well. It's like we're part of the family. We're taking the kid's perspective here, sitting with them, having this lovely time when all of a sudden he's called out by their maid and things begin to go dark. So there's a sense that the film is better known than the book to some extent. Part of its success is because of this Christmas release in the UK and a Christmas perennial. And we notice here that the kids are beginning to be shut out of the action for the first time. And there's interesting touches, like we don't get to get a look at the police's faces until they actually leave the house, and we're in the father's perspective. As we're in the kids' mindset in the house, we don't get to see them. So now mother's called out. And as she leaves with Ruth, we, along with the children, are shut out Kay Corleone style. And now we see the greens are beginning to recede. There's more brown in the frame. And again, these sort of half-heard, half-glimpsed images and half-heard sounds as the kids sneak down the stairs. We're only getting snatches of the situation. When Nesbit was writing The Railway Children in 1906, she was clearly influenced by a then famous court case in France, stretching from 1894 to 1906, known as the Dreyfus affair, in where a military captain, Alfred Dreyfus, was accused of selling French state secrets to the Germans and convicted of treason, despite evidence in his favour being suppressed and evidence damning him being forged. Probably, as it later emerged, because Dreyfus was of Jewish descent. The case became a notable public example of anti-Semitism. And just like Father, Dreyfus father didn't end up spending, but he was sentenced. But Dreyfus spent nearly 5 years on Devil's Island before being finally proved innocent, and not only exonerated, but fully reinstated into the military in 1899. The case garnered major media attention, and he was exonerated in 1899. He was reinstated later. But the case garnered major media attention around France and split the French public in two in terms of who they sided with. So there's a clear parallel between what happens to father in this and that particular case. And this scene here is almost a perversion of a wintry Christmas scene, but also kind of Dickensian as well, which is something that will keep coming up. And so we see here now, like the walls look almost brown, and we've got this pale pistachio almost into white, off-white. And yeah, there's not a lot of green in their world now. It's as things get very unhappy. So Dinah Sheridan, who plays Mother here, this character is Nesbit's idealised surrogate, a mother who earns for her family by writing and is incredibly selfless in terms of her children and taking care of her family. But Sheridan herself is such an interesting, fascinating case. I mentioned earlier that she played Peter Pan and Wendy on stage in the early 30s, but she was also one of the earliest people to act for television in the mid to late 1930s as TV was first rolling out in Britain. And she has the curious distinction of being the first actor to be interviewed on television in a BBC magazine show called Picture Page. And she also appeared in a 1938 program called Gallows Glorious, which was the first three-act play to be broadcast on television. But by the early 1950s, Sheridan became a movie star in the UK, first in 1951 with Where No Vultures Fly for director Harry Watts. She made her movie debut in the mid-30s, but by the early 50s, things were starting to fly for her. So that was an adventure film shot in Africa. Then she had a prominent role in David Lean's 1952 film, The Sound Barrier, before taking a leading role in a very popular comedy called Genevieve in 1953, which was a hit screwball comedy about two couples tooling around in a vintage car rally. Genevieve became the second highest grossing film of the year in the UK and saw Sheridan rise into the ranks of Britain's top 10 box office stars of 1953. So Dinah was actually poised to become a big star, but just as her international career beckoned after Genevieve, she decided to marry a guy named John Davis, who was the chief of the Rank organisation, whose studio produced Genevieve, so essentially the studio boss. But upon marrying her, Davis made Dinah quit acting to raise a family, to be a homemaker, and forbade her from acting. So Sheridan spent the next 12 years of her life out of the business. On the cusp of international stardom, Sheridan was basically taken off the board by her husband. And it transpired that her marriage became so psychologically abusive that Sheridan was hospitalised with a breakdown, went to court, and won the right to divorce Davis on the grounds of cruelty. So after her divorce went through, Sheridan returned to acting on stage. This was in 1965 by this point, so 12 years since Genevieve. And she quickly found success back on the stage, but as the 60s began to cede to the 70s, she was keen to return to acting on film. And so Lionel Jeffries asked her to lunch about the possibility of returning to the screen to play Mother in this film. Her and Jeffries were friends. This is a running theme we'll get, of course, throughout this, is that Jeffries hired so many of his friends or colleagues he enjoyed working with on this film. So Sheridan was delighted to be asked to be played Mother in this, and she said, I had my fingers crossed under the table, hoping he would make me a firm offer. And once they're on set, Lionel confessed that he also had his fingers crossed in the same meeting, hoping she'd agree. So that worked out well. But after The Railway Children became her first screen role since Genevieve, she only made one more film after this. In 1980, she appeared in the murder mystery film within a film that opens Guy Hamilton's all-star Agatha Christie adaptation, The Mirror Cracked. But The Railway Children did launch Sheridan into a thriving television career, which saw her act regularly on the small screen from 1971 to 1999. So perhaps we have this film and Lionel Jeffries to thank for saving Dinah Sheridan's screen career from oblivion. But yeah, this was her first and penultimate film after Genevieve. This Hitchcockian staircase shot here. Even in a family film like this, Hitchcock's shadow looms so large over the history of British cinema. So the arrival of Aunt Emma here en route to India as a governess is another signifier that the children's life is changing, and not necessarily for the better. Because mother and father are depicted largely as not particularly authoritarian. They're very sweet, and they let the kids kind of express themselves and do what they do. To which Aunt Emma is a stern contrast in her perfect white outfit and pith helmet, and she's very much you are to be seen and not heard, and I prefer it that way. It's perhaps a damning statement on the state of British film in 1970, in the 60s and 1970s. But there are a lot of actors in this for whom it was either their first or only film, or their first film after a large break, or one of their last films. For the actress playing Aunt Emma here, Beatrix Mackey, this was her only movie role. But she worked on over 40 TV shows, but mostly in single episode guest roles and leads in a couple of now lost to time sitcoms, sadly. And the cook here, Amelia Bainton, appeared in 8 movies, playing small roles in all of them. As well as this, she pops up in James Bond's Thunderball and 5 films with the word carry on in the title, playing characters whose names started with Mrs. Fussy, Mrs. Spragg, Mrs. Jenkins and Mrs. Tuttle in 4 of the Carry On films. And the Carry On films will become a bit of a theme as well throughout this. I think between the Carry On film series and Hammer horror films, I think those 2 things kept the English film industry alive throughout the 60s and 70s. And Lancaster. But I have to say, Amelia Bainton, who is the cook here, during the Second World War, she toured with stars in battle dress, performing in Italy and Austria, entertaining troops until the end of hostilities in 1945. And Anne Lancaster, who plays Ruth and is about to get dunked here, this was her last movie. She died of cancer 2 months before this film was released, but had a long career working extensively in British comedy with a murderer's row of UK comedy legends, everyone from Tony Hancock to Spike Milligan, from Benny Hill to Dick Emery, and appeared in a couple of, yes, Carry On movies. But besides playing the foil for a host of comedy legends, Anne Lancaster here also had a curious career, being famous for doing voiceovers for commercials, often playing the voices of children and playing small, often uncredited roles in big movies like The Magic Box with Laurence Olivier, The Million Pound Note with Gregory Peck, The Dirty Dozen, the Titanic film A Night to Remember, Otto Preming's Bunny Lake is Missing, and the Raquel Welch vehicle Fathom, which was from the makers of the 1966 Batman movie. But in 1965, Lancaster appeared in a comedy called The Secret of My Success, no relation to the Michael J. Fox movie from the 80s, alongside Shirley Jones, Stella Stevens, and Honor Blackman, but most notably opposite Lionel Jeffries, who was playing 4 roles in the film in sort of a kind of mini Peter Sellers kind of effort. And they remain friends, and he cast her in this. I love this look from Dinah Sheridan. It's like this mini wink. It's like, no, but good.
We're going to have to play it being poor for a while.
So Jeffries really took a chance on a lot of people who he thought deserved larger roles or that he just enjoyed working with here, which was really lovely. So Aunt Emma will not be coming to Yorkshire with them, which I'm sure the kids are delighted about. And they all load into the train, about to leave London behind. So we have this beautifully sun backlit vista of the train crossing the bridge, and it's now clear they're moving from the old world into the new. It's almost like a fantasy progression, leaving the upper middle class of London behind for the soon-to-be everyday magical world of Oakworth Station and the 3 Chimneys house. And we already see patches of green. There's some bright red roses there from their journey to this. But Jeffries kind of begins to fade to the left here, which is interesting, because in the book, the family are forced to walk from the station to their new home as nobody is at the station to meet them, as happens here. But Jeffries adds an image more associated with a sort of British rural Gothic horror. This gruff, unwelcoming man in a cloak with a scarred face and cataracts driving a coach, who leaves them behind to trail behind him. And suddenly they're wondering, is there something terrible awaiting them? Are we being led into a horror movie here? So for the next few minutes, from their journey to the station to orienting themselves within their new home, everything is given this dark, shadowy, ugly patina that not only reflects the fine British tradition of Gothic horror, but also the work of Charles Dickens. I like to presume the children have likely read some Dickens, and feel like they're perhaps faced with a future of harsh Dickensian poverty straight out of David Copperfield. At least that. This actor here, the coach driver, is a guy named Paddy Ward. This was his first movie. He also appeared in Jeffries' next film as director, The Amazing Mr. Blunden. And he became a TV veteran whose career spanned from the early 1950s to the mid-2000s. So he acted on telly for 50 years. Notably, he played two different roles in two episodes of the 1957 Railway Children TV adaptation. He's the only actor to make the jump from the 1957 version. And he went on to have prominent roles later in 1998 with the comedy movie Waking Ned Devine, and in 2005's Casanova for director Lasse Hallström with Heath Ledger. So as they step into the darkness of the house, amongst the squeaking of what might be rats, the coach driver cackles behind them. He's spookily underlit. It's like they've stepped, if they've not stepped into a Dickensian world, they've stepped into a Hammer horror movie. And there is a very Hammer kind of feel to this as well, to this sequence. You can't, anything sort of remotely gothic horror in this is set during this era, made in Britain in the 60s and 70s. That Hammer film is unmistakable. But that might not be a complete accident, because not only is Jeffries tapping into the English Gothic literary and cinematic tradition to build up this suspense and potential fear of what the family have walked into, but this film's interiors were shot at the famous Elstree Studios, exactly where Hammer had shot films like Lust for a Vampire and Scars for Dracula this very same year. Hammer had been shooting at Elstree since moving from Bray Studios in the early 1960s. And of course, that Elstree later became super famous for being the location, the studios of choice for Star Wars. But Hammer and this and so many movies all fit into this glorious lineage of Gothic cinema, which Jeffries really taps into to create this benign suspense. And this could be the mother and children's nightmare of the countryside. But very soon, we see Mother doing something that she does quite frequently in this, and in particular in the novel as well, which is lifting their spirits.
Beastly woman.
So she's taken aback by perhaps Mrs. Viney hasn't left them the food.
I'm starving. I know. There's some food in the cases.
And now there's some in the cellar. Quick, make it an adventure. It's a voyage of discovery. Search the house. It's nice. The mother takes that moment of frustration and then readjusts. And soon enough, Mother has produced some magics. They find a phonograph. They find a selection of oddly matched snacks.
No, Phil, no, you do not put the marmalade spoon into the sardines.
Oh, Mummy, it's gorgeous, Mummy.
Tell you what, let's drink Aunt Emma's health. Good idea. Here's to Aunt Emma. To Aunt Emma.
Aunt Emma.
And all who say.
I love that line. And all who sail in her. So now it's a beautiful brand new day. This location was a place called Bent's Farm, which was actually only a couple of miles away from the Oakworth station location. So the kids probably could have walked it if they'd had the time. The fact that so many of this film's locations have now become tourist attractions is an indicator of just how beloved this film has become in the UK. Obviously, it's a lot lesser known in the US and, from my perspective, Australia. But in the UK, it's a real institution. And here is Mrs. Viney, who didn't leave them without food after all. They were just looking in the wrong place. Mrs. Viney here is played by an actress named Brenda Cowling, who was a RADA graduate with Lionel Jeffries. They attended RADA in the late 40s. So here with this particularly joyous shot of the lush, verdant green fields and the kids skipping through them, I mean, it's straight up fantasy. This is where their world of wonder begins. They discover the magical land of the tunnel, the dragon-like train, which is green and looks remarkably like Peter's toy engine, as if Peter's engine had come to life. So Edith Nesbit was a pioneer in taking children's literature out of secondary worlds of fantasy and grounding it in a recognizable reality, which then has forms of very relatable magic built into it. These idealized versions of Edwardian pastoral life that the children find magic in, but a magic which the readers could plausibly find in the real world. And that was a reasonably new development for popular children's literature at the time, at the turn of the 19th into the 20th century. Nesbit's biographer, Julia Briggs, termed Nesbit the first modern writer for children, largely for this reason, for setting stories rather than in a secondary world, setting them in the real world, and thus setting the table for writers like Enid Blyton to follow in her wake. Take note of the kids walking on the tracks here. This is, I will mention something about this later. But it's not something you'd see kids doing now. Let's just say that. So here the children discover Oakworth Station, which is on the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway line at the village of Hayworth, Keighley in Bradford, West Yorkshire. It had already been closed to passengers and traffic since 1962. Originally, they were going to call the station another name, but they liked the Oakworth name set out on the grass and everything else, and they just decided to keep it. And now Oakworth has become, which is a real place, which has now become inextricably identified with the railway children. But the children explore the station like it's a museum or a historical landmark from another world. And here we meet the kindly porter and Nesbit's working-class hero, Albert Perks, played by Bernard Cribbins, who, outside of Agatha, is the film's most famous cast member. He's hugely popular in the UK as a comedy star of stage and screen, and even as a recording artist. He was born in 1928, became an actor at 14, and made his screen debut on TV in 1956, his film debut the year after that. But he first achieved his fame in the early 60s with a trio of novelty singles, including one called Right Said Fred, a term which might sound familiar to those who loved or were driven mad by the 1991 hit song I'm Too Sexy, as the band who sung that song took their name from Cribbins' song. So throughout the 1960s, Bernard Cribbins appeared in, yes, not one, but two Carry On films, Carry On Jack and Carry On Spying, keeping the British film industry afloat, which is something, so again, this thing about Carry On and Hammer turning up is something, this sort of sex and violence thing is something that will become important later in our story. But Cribbins also starred in the second Doctor Who feature film, Daleks Invasion Earth, 2150 AD, the James Bond spoof Casino Royale, starred alongside Jerry Lewis in Don't Raise the Bridge, Lower the River, the jungle adventure She, alongside a scantily clad Ursula Andress. But he's probably most well known in America for his roles as the crotchety barman Felix Forsyth in Alfred Hitchcock's Frenzy, and on TV as an annoying hotel guest who Basil Fawlty mistakes for a hotel inspector in an iconic episode of Fawlty Towers, and for returning to Doctor Who in the late 2000s alongside 10th Doctor David Tennant, playing the grandfather of Catherine Tate's companion character Donald Noble, and briefly becoming a companion himself, making Cribbins the only actor ever to have played two Doctor Who companions and appear opposite the Daleks on the big and small screen versions of the characters. So here we see the kids in the new house rugged up without heat, and this is cold as a symbol of poverty. In the past, they had heaters and insulation from the cold, but here, we saw the beautiful roaring fire at the start. But here, all of that apparatus of privilege has been taken away. And here is the first we see of Mother writing, which is a recurring theme throughout the film, that Mother writes to bring in a living while Father is in prison. Like Mother, E. Nesbit became the chief breadwinner in her family. And again, Mother is almost a fantasy version of Nesbit. So now the children return to the station to see what it's going to bring to them. And here is where they catch their first glimpse of their future benefactor.
Well, why don't we wave anyway?
The mysterious but kindly, quote-unquote, old gentleman, which is the only name he's ever known by in Nesbit's novel and in the film. Here they wave. And here is the old gentleman, played by William Mervyn. And it's weird. Half that paper seems to not have print on it. It's one of those things that Blu-rays show up. So I find it intriguing, both in the book and the film, that they've only been poor for about 2 nights, and Peter is immediately heading out to steal coal, to heat up his cold house and help his mother. But I wonder whether this is Nesbit making a commentary on poverty and on how quickly honourable people who are faced with dire circumstances are forced with little choice but to commit justifiable theft for warmth and sustenance. It could be just a fun caper, but stealing is so unlikely for anyone in this otherwise very honest and upright family that it does feel like a comment.
It's about time they had it seen to.
The whole plot here with Peter stealing the coal and particularly the girls not being involved, because in the book the girls help him, and the rewrite we're about to see is one of the legacies of writing out the station master character. Because in the film, Perks is the sole focus of the railway employees for economy's sake, but in the book there's a station master who they meet as well, who Perks works alongside. And at this moment here, they're all caught by the station master. So in the book, they're all stealing this, they're all dragging in the pram together, and the station master catches them. And eventually they win him over, and he doesn't report them to the police, which is probably good, because given it's in Edwardian times, they'd probably be thrown in prison or a workhouse. But by reducing the railway staff down to Perks, Jeffries has the girls bust him and tell him it's wrong to be stealing and he shouldn't be doing it.
But that's stealing.
And this shot here, with the way Peter's face is dirtied and framed in shadow, gives this image a particularly Dickensian feel.
From the top. That's mining, not stealing. If it was, all the miners in the world would be in jail.
Oh, Pete.
Oh, Pete. Pete.
I love that.
We have to take it
How is she 20? That just blows my mind. So that difference is really only worth mentioning because the film is so incredibly faithful to the book. A lot of the dialogue has been straight up lifted from the book. It's tempting to write Lionel Jeffries' screenplay off as mere transposition. And he said himself, he kept to the story. It would be an imposition not to. After all, Nesbit survived 50 years. But in adaptation, Jeffries retained everything about the book that is beloved and made smart, subtle cuts for economy and clarity. Getting rid of the less important sidebars that are less key to the plot or Nesbit's message and worldview. And as a consequence, there's little from the book that's really missed in the film. It's such a deft work of adaptation, especially for a first-time screenwriter. And again, he was clearly besotted with the material, and it's so incredibly faithful to it. So now Peter is fetching the local doctor because their mother is ill, and the kids are shocked and worried at mother getting ill because they've not really seen her ill very much. And again, this is another indicator of their newfound poverty, because they're now seemingly much more vulnerable to sickness as a side effect of poverty due to increased cold and all of this. The doctor, the actor who plays Dr. Forrest here, is a guy named Peter Bromelow, who would go on to have a pretty interesting career, but for reasons unknown, and I've tried to dig into this in my research, and I haven't been able to uncover why, his voice was dubbed by veteran character actor Richard Leach. Bromelow had only made his film debut three years before in Camelot, but moved to America at about this time, pretty much after shooting this, and got into a career in US TV, appearing in shows like The Virginian, Love American Style, Hawaii Five-0, and Remington Steele, but also had this short but eclectic movie career in Hollywood that saw him in everything from Michael Ritchie's Semi-Tough to Cheech and Chong's next movie to Breakin', Cannon's hit breakdancing movie from the 80s. He's one of the main villains in Andy Sedaris' Hard Ticket to Hawaii. His character's name's Mr. Chang. He pops up in Scrooge, To My Stepmother as an Alien. He plays a brief role as a hotel manager in David Lynch's Wild at Heart. And his final role was in the pilot episode of the Bruce Campbell starring comedy western The Adventures of Briscoe County Jr. in 1993, which was a year before he died in 1994. But Bromelow was also very active in the gay motorcycle club scene in Southern California. His extensive collection of brochures, programs, photographs, and memorabilia, reaching from 1967 to 1994, are on display at the National Gay and Lesbian Archive, well, not on display, but they're archived in the National Gay and Lesbian Archives at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. And he also has he unofficially named the long-running Los Angeles uniform fetish group, the Black and Tans. So that's something. So we begin to see Bobbie shoulder some of mother's burden, which is something that will increase as the film goes on, becoming the children's sort of de facto mother in a lot of ways, which is really where her journey towards adulthood and responsibility begins. While she's still a child when the film ends, we can see she's well on the way to becoming a grown-up, able to perhaps assume responsibility of a family. So, as I said earlier, the Oakworth station here is as it is in real life. It no longer runs, obviously. It was closed in 1962. It was on the Keighley and Worth Valley Railway line, renamed the Great Northern and Southern Railway line for the film. And it was chosen because there were very few heritage railways remaining in Britain. And the Keighley and Worth Valley line was the only one that could provide a tunnel, which will become very important later in the film. So the Oakworth station is in Hayworth, in Bradford, in West Yorkshire, and it's visited by scores of tourists every year. The film makes an interesting use of transportation for each character or stage of the story as well. From the coach driver's rickety horse and cart when they arrive that can't even carry their bags, to the elegance of the doctor's horse and cart, to the comedy here of Perks's three-wheeler bike with the basket trailing on the back. The transport seems not only to denote class but progress, particularly in the form of train ridden by the old gentleman. And even at this point, bicycles would be something relatively new in 1906. So a bit of old English hall comedy going on with Perks in this film at times. He's struggling to open the boom gates, and when he's delivering this massive care package that the old gentleman has arranged for Mother. Apparently Lionel Jeffries, who was a very well-known actor himself at this point, considered playing Perks himself. And when you look at him, you kind of wonder why he didn't. But he was won over by Cribben's brand of what Jeffries called his lovely, calm comedy. And just before shooting this film, Cribbins actually had his own sketch comedy series for Thames Television titled Cribbins, which actually screened as an occasional replacement for the Benny Hill show in the US. It was one of 5 shows bundled up to expand that show's episode count under the title After Benny, Thames Presents. So again, it was a mark of just how well-known Cribbins was in the UK that he was able to get his own show. So, of course, let's turn our attention to the children. Of course, we all know Jenny Agutter on the right hand of screen as Nurse Price in An American Werewolf in London. But at this stage in her career, she was a relatively new star. It's also worth mentioning that she was the only major holdover from the 1968 adaptation of The Railway Children, playing Bobbie in both versions. And it's also good to mention, so the Railway Children had been adapted several times before this film. It was adapted for radio in 1943. Then for television, there were 2 series in 1951, again in 1957, and all of those ones have been lost to time. Then there was a hit 1968 version, which had Agutter playing Bobbie and another cast member who we'll meet later. And this was only 2 years after that, so it was very soon. But this was such a big hit and was repeated so many times. This is the definitive screen version. It was adapted again in 2000 for television. So Jeffries loved Agutter's performance in the 1968 show and thought she'd be good for this. But Agutter was reluctant. Her career got off to a flying start. She shot to local fame by appearing in a 1965 TV show called The Newcomers, then landing a handful of movie roles, including a small role as Julie Andrews' neglected daughter in Robert Wise's 1968 musical Star, and in a more grown-up role in the gritty thriller I Start Counting a year later, playing a teenager who's obsessed with her stepbrother who may or may not be a serial killer. She actually shot her role in director Nicholas Roeg's film Walkabout after that, before The Railway Children, playing a 16-year-old stranded in the Australian outback with her little brother. So when Jeffries approached her about returning to the role of Bobbie again, Agatha was resistant, thinking she would be backsliding into kids' roles just as she was graduating to adult parts. But she found Jeffries such a lovely and exuberant character, she couldn't resist. So it's weird that this was shot after Walkabout but released beforehand, because the on-screen chronology of the way it ended up feels more correct, going from I Start Counting to this to Walkabout. The year after this, Agatha continued in British television for a couple more years, and she won an Emmy for Best Actress in a Supporting Role in a Drama in 1972 for the BBC telly movie The Snow Goose. Until she moved, she moved to America to pursue stardom after that, and with an Emmy under your belt, why wouldn't you? And she hit the ground running immediately, landing the female lead opposite Michael York in the big-budget sci-fi classic Logan's Run, then winding up amongst the all-star ensemble of John Sturges' Nazis plot to kidnap Churchill World War II caper The Eagle Has Landed, and in Sidney Lumet's adaptation of Peter Shaffer's stage hit Equus, for which she won a BAFTA award. And that was all within a 2-year span of arriving in Hollywood. So she really burst to life, and then ended up in John Landis's An American Werewolf in London about 3 or 4 years after that. But Agatha continued to work consistently in films and TV throughout the 80s and 90s, as well as acting on stage, including a stint with the Royal Shakespeare Company. But after marrying in 1990, she moved back to England to have a child and raise them. And besides a touring season of Love's Labour's Lost with the Royal Shakespeare Company in 1995, which toured to Tokyo, she's worked mainly in television ever since, most notably nowadays as Sister Julienne in the period medical drama called The Midwife. I'd say Agatha is also in a cool little film I saw a couple of years ago called Sometimes Always Never, with Bill Nye as a champion Scrabble player who's on a mission to reconnect with his estranged son. And Agatha is a woman he meets along the way who he has a dalliance with. It's a lovely film and just a delight to see her on the big screen again. Now, there's an interesting chat here regarding Bobbie being worried that Mother won't be able to pay for her medical bills. And the doctor mentions having a so-called club of people who currently don't have the means to pay, for whom he provides free medical care, which is essentially a form of Medicare, or as Americans might say, Medicaid. And this is very much a Nesbit touch. Nesbit is communicating a vision here of a community that takes care of one another, where everyone pitches in. And in fact, Nesbit, in her personal life, was a committed socialist and political activist who, along with her husband, Hubert Bland, helped to form the Fabian Society, who were key players in the turn of the 20th century Labour movement, and were part of a committee that wound up forming the British Labour Party, who are today the major centre-left party in the UK, opposing the Conservative Party. So that idea of, Medicare is something that's was very much a socialist innovation. So here it's Bobbie's birthday. She's been told to drop everything and meet everyone in the main room. So here, Bobbie's birthday is given this beautiful magical treatment. It's almost a fantasy version of a surprise party. And this beautiful slow zoom. And again, slow dolly, sorry. There's not a lot of dolly shots in this film. So when they come, they're very noticeable and obviously a moment of great impact. Bobbie's always so good as an elder sister and a surrogate mother at times. There's a feeling that she deserves this moment of magic. And again, it's a form of everyday magic. But it also, and as we see here, she's put on a platform to glide throughout the room as she receives presents and well wishes. This sort of gliding from one person to another. It's like a debutante ball almost, meets a mini Christmas. And again, more of the Christmassy feel that made this such a popular seasonal perennial. But it also acknowledges, particularly here in her interaction with her mother, that Bobbie is on the verge of womanhood, that her childhood is soon going to end. Like the emotion on her mother's face. There is this feeling that she's given this piece of jewelry. I love that Jenny can't blow the one candle out. That's hilarious. But yeah, she's given a piece of jewelry by her mother. And this is also her mother's need to preserve childhood for one last time, to make it good. Even under these trying circumstances, Bobbie's going to get the best birthday ever. And it's just a lovely moment. And it's also, even though she is on the cusp of womanhood, it's a moment where Bobbie gets to be a kid.
Have a lovely party, my dear.
Thank you for coming.
And the platform taking her back again. It's this dreamlike feel to the whole sequence. And she's overwhelmed with the wonder of it. And again, with the porter there and the doctor there, it's this community that is forming around them. And Nesbit and also Jeffries as well are very focused on this sort of notion of community. So Nesbit is so we'll get into a bit of personal history of Edith Nesbit, the writer of the Railway Children novel. Her father died when she was 4 and her sister Mary was ill, so Nesbit and her mother and her family moved around a lot, around England, France, Germany and Spain, before settling for 3 years in Halstead Hall in northwest Kent, where she used to take walks between Chelsfield and Halstead railway stations, which is about a 40-minute walk. Halstead Station is now called Knockholt Station. And Nesbit was inspired by this pastoral area, particularly coming from Surrey, then London, and all of these European cities, coming to this quiet place of tranquility and the railway as a setting of everyday wonder, and decided to set her book in a familiar place for a tale of children getting on in the face of adversity. And so here at the start, Bobbie has this kind of don't ask, don't tell thing with mother. Like she's very receptive to mother's moods, whereas the other kids kind of live in a world of their own. Bobbie is very intuitive and knows when to leave mother alone and how much to press her on what the matter is and what's up with father. She's very astute. But as the film will go on, she will develop into more of a confidant. So when Nesbit was 17, her family moved back to London and she met her husband that year. Had her first poem published the next year called Under the Trees in a magazine called Good Words. And contrary to the quaint traditional Edwardian settings of her books, Nesbit was very much a modern woman. She cut her hair short, she smoked incessantly, allowed her husband's mistress to live in their house and adopted the 2 kids he had with her. In a lot of ways, she was a feminist, although she was against women's suffrage, although this has been said to have been a view adopted by osmosis from her husband, who was a particular critic of the suffragette movement, giving odd speeches opposing giving women the vote, making wild allusions like "What's next? Votes for dogs?" which is a ridiculous argument, probably familiar to anyone nowadays in the marriage equality movement, because they were copying the same nonsense. So now we have the Russian, who it's discovered is a writer named Shapansky, who is fleeing persecution from Russia, from pre-communist Russia, after writing what Mother calls a beautiful book about poor people and how to help them. He's seeking asylum in England, trying to find his wife and children. And it's been said that Shapansky is most likely an amalgam of 2 real-life Russian dissidents, Sergius Stepniak and Peter Kropotkin, pro-Marxists and authors who were both friends of E. Nesbit. So let's keep an eye on this large guy in the back in a second. I love this guy. No comprende. It's like, why? But this big gentleman here on the left of screen in the bowler hat, his character is named Malcolm. And his name is Paul Luty, and he's a wrestler who's, as you can see by his build there on the left, he's a wrestler whose voice clearly wasn't up to scratch because his voice was subsequently dubbed by Lionel Jeffries. So when we briefly hear Malcolm speak, it's our writer-director that we're hearing. So Nesbit laid in this aspect of her story with the Russian, as she was sympathetic to the cause of Russian dissidents who were being persecuted for their views on the ruling class's mistreatment of the working class. Nesbit and Bland, her husband Hubert Bland, were Marxists, but democratic socialists. As I said, they co-founded the Fabian Society, and that society's remit was to advance the principles of democratic socialism via reformist efforts in democracies rather than by revolutionary overflow. So you could probably say E. Nesbit was the Bernie Sanders of her time in a lot of ways, definitely coming from the same place. And the Fabian Society were one of the founding organisations of the Labour Representation Committee in 1900, which, as I mentioned earlier, had an important influence on the formation of the Labour Party. But the impetus to form the Labour Representation Committee was driven by the Amalgamated Society of Railway Servants, who were tired of being taken advantage of and wanted better working conditions for their people, which grew out of the trade union movement and socialist parties of the 19th century. So it's essentially people like Perks forming this group, leading to this major party. So you can almost say the UK Labour Party was born from the protestations of people like Perks fighting for the working class. So there's this, and giving the working class a voice. So there's this other layer of subtext here. Perhaps this story's railway setting isn't just a fond childhood remembrance. Maybe it's slightly more pointed, particularly in making the porter a working class hero. So Nesbit had been writing novels and short stories since 1885. She'd even written 4 collections of horror stories. But she'd begun to diverge into writing short stories for kids in the early 1890s, and it wasn't until the success of her first novel for children, The Story of the Treasure Seekers, in 1899, that she became a bestseller. She said she was attracted to writing for children as she felt she herself was a child in a grown-up world. The Story of the Treasure Seekers headed up a trilogy, and then she wrote another famous book in 1902 called 5 Children and It, which launched another trilogy, after which came The Railway Children. So the first trilogy was the Bastable Family, the second one was the Samede trilogy. And Nesbit continued to write steadily and smoke profusely until her death from lung cancer in 1924 at the age of 65, having written over 60 novels and short story collections. So she was an incredibly prolific author. So his mother taking father's clothes out of his chest to help clothe the Russian. And you wonder for a while, especially in the book as well, you wonder whether the Russian is going to become a sort of an emotional father surrogate, and mother taking care of him, certainly. Because in the book and also in the film as well, mother is proven to be a big, like she's a huge admirer of Szczepański's book. And so you wonder for a sec whether, taking care of him is a bit of a way to have a man in her life, but it doesn't go quite that far. So we see a costume choice here with Bobbie and Mother wearing very similar outfits. And it's the beginning of Bobbie starting to transcend childhood and become the family's second in command, which she sort of is, but I think at the start it's a little bit more even, but now it's more implicit. As in the scene by the fireplace earlier, Bobbie's astuteness is coming in handy here. But it's also her growing awareness of her parents' dilemma as part of her growing from a child into an adult. So the second of our railway children is Sally Thompson here, who I said earlier is 20 years old, playing an 11-year-old. Phyllis is the youngest of the kids in the book and is the youngest of the kids here, and yet the oldest actress. So Thompson was nominated for a BAFTA for this film, a British Academy of Film and Television Award, in case you don't know what BAFTA means. And her BAFTA nomination was for Most Promising Newcomer to the Leading Film Roles, competing against Michael Sarrazin for They Shoot Horses, Don't They? And believe it or not, Liza Minnelli for The Sterile Cuckoo. But all lost to David Bradley in Ken Loach's Kes. The next year, Thompson appeared in, boy, you want to go for a polar opposite, Sam Peckinpah's Straw Dogs, from The Railway Children to Straw Dogs. How do you make that leap? But Thompson became most famous in the mid-1970s for playing Joe in a sitcom called Man About the House, which is a hit sitcom about two women who become famous for sharing a flat with a young bachelor. Now, this premise might seem familiar to US audiences, as Man About the House was remade as Three's Company, with John Ritter, Joyce DeWitt, and Suzanne Summers. The Russian here is played by Gordon Whiting, and he was a character actor whose screen career ran from the early 50s to the late 80s. He'd previously appeared in A Night to Remember and Hammer's Curse of the Werewolf. He would only appear in one more film after The Railway Children, but continued to work in television until the end of the 1980s, presumably retiring well before his death in 2002. But not much information is out there about him. So here comes their favourite steam engine again. But trouble is afoot as the trees begin to move. So this landslide sequence is very nicely done, and it's perfectly reflective of the book. So in the book, it starts out like the one thing that might truly be magic. Trees are moving towards them, like something out of Macbeth. But the kids slowly realise that it's a landslide, which then falls across the tracks and leads to the kids' first major heroic moment. This landslide sequence apparently took a day to set up, with explosives hidden in the trees, particularly for the moment we're about to see. Sally Thompson recalled being petrified on set, even though she's miles away from it. It's very well done. So after playing Jo on Man About the House for 4 years, Sally Thompson took a break from acting to travel the world. And later in the mid-80s returned to act on stage, and then only sporadically. And then she retired altogether about a decade later to raise her daughter, and she's only made a handful of stage appearances since. So her screen career effectively ended with the end of the 1970s. Which is a story that mirrors Gary Warren, who plays Peter. He first appeared on television playing Pinocchio in Disney's Wonderland, then guested on a handful of TV shows like Z-Cars, then a small role in the family film Up in the Air, before landing his role in The Railway Children. After this, Warren won leads on the second season of the hit kids show Catweasel, which some Americans might know. Australians will definitely know, as it played on ABC TV over here, which is about an eccentric 11th century wizard who finds himself time-travelling to the 20th century. And Warren also headlined a short-lived family sitcom called Alexander the Greatest and performed on the West End. He seemed to have quite a robust career as a young actor during the 1970s, but I guess like many a child actor, as they get older, perhaps the roles dry up or they develop other interests or life moves them in a different direction. And Gary retired from acting at the end of the 1970s. There is an erroneous IMDb credit having him cast in 1979's Escape from Alcatraz as a guard, and they even call him Gary G. Warren, which is definitely not him. But given a 2010's interview from a book about the making of The Railway Children written by a guy named Jim Shipley, who was a railway volunteer and who was around the set at the time, he caught up with Warren in the 2010s and had the first interview with him anyone had in 30, 40 years, and revealed that Warren had left the business to move to Oxfordshire to raise a family. So I doubt that he was tooling around San Francisco with Don Siegel and Clint Eastwood. So this film here, made Thompson and Warren stars at the start of the decade, and by the end of the decade, both would never act to the screen again, whereas Agatha went from strength to strength. So it's an odd quirk. So here is the children's major heroic moment, and it's one of the very few things that perhaps the film doesn't capture as potently as the book, is that Phyllis often regards the train as a dragon, with flashing eyes and a tail trailing behind it. But this is one of the few moments where the train almost does seem like a monster, a possibly uncontrollable beast steaming towards them. Some may say unstoppable, like the Tony Scott Runaway Train film of 2010, which is great. So the sequence here where the train pulls up to Bobbie and just stops short, we're about to see now, kids waving their petticoats. This was shot actually with the train backing, that shot there was with the train backing away from Agatha, and then they just reversed the film to make it look as if it was going towards her and almost hit her. The oldest trick in the book. So this film had been shown again and again on TV on Christmas and Easter and throughout the year for over 30 years without a complaint. And this is why I mentioned earlier to clock the scene where they were walking on the tracks. Because in 2013, the British Board of Film Classification were moved to release a statement saying that they had received their first ever complaint about the railway children. Someone had written to them saying that complaining that the film encouraged children to trespass upon railway tracks. So the BBFC noted that the children did trespass upon the line, but only to warn an approaching train of the danger of a landslide on the track ahead. Although this does ignore that earlier in the film, they did walk upon the track simply to get to the station, as we saw. But the BBFC also pointed out that the film is set in Edwardian times, when access to railway lines was not under the same restrictions as modern times. Says something about the 2010s that this was the point when somebody had to complain. So given we're an hour in, this might be a good time to dig into the life and times of the film's writer-director, Lionel Jeffries. This was his first film in those capacities. He hadn't made anything else prior to this, hadn't directed for stage or screen in any form. Jeffries had achieved considerable fame as an instantly recognisable comic actor in British films throughout the 50s and 60s. After he went prematurely bald at 19, something he blamed on the extreme heat of Burma, where he was stationed as a 19-year-old during World War II, he wound up playing roles of a much more advanced age than he actually was. This was never more apparent in what was perhaps his most famous on-screen role, playing in Ken Hughes's Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, when he played Grandpa Potts, Dick Van Dyke's father, despite being 6 months younger than Dick Van Dyke. Jeffries studied at RADA in the late 1940s, along with the actress who played Mrs. Viney. So, making his film debut in an uncredited role as bald RADA student in Alfred Hitchcock's Stage Fright seemed about right. And the actress that played Mrs. Viney also made her debut in the same film. So that's kind of cute. They were both students, and they both made their debut in the same film. But he became a very popular comic actor during this time, turning in memorable character work, often playing eccentric older Englishmen in major films such as The Colditz Story, Doctor at Large, Blue Murder in St. Trinian's, The Trials of Oscar Wilde, the Peter Sellers Vehicles Two-Way Stretch and The Wrong Arm of the Law, Hammer Films' The Quatermass Experiment and The Revenge of Frankenstein, as well as 1966's The Spy with the Cold Nose, for which he was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Actor in a Comedy or Musical. And judging by its title, it is indeed a film about a pooch who became a government asset in an espionage story. So this quick scene here has a beautiful dreamlike quality, shot through flowers, feeling very much like Bobbie's birthday sequence in a way. It's or the first moment the children run through the fields. And again, it's this high, beautiful moment where they've been honoured as heroes and everything is right for the world. Everything is right with the world for a moment. So Jeffries was sailing from England to America to shoot Chitty Chitty Bang Bang before realising he'd left his books at home and had nothing to read on the trip. So he had his 13-year-old daughter with him, and she had a copy of The Railway Children, and so he borrowed that to have a read and was immediately taken by it. Lionel Jeffries and his wife, Eileen Walsh, who had married in 1951 and remained so until he died in 2010, were devout Roman Catholics. And although the couple were very accepting and they invited many gay and lesbian friends to their famously lively dinners they hosted at home and were said to be incredibly lovely people. But Jeffries was considerably less pleased about the increasing permissiveness of sex and violence on British screens, big and small. Coupled with the then parlous state of the UK film industry, cinema attendances had fallen, Disney had recently ended their 20-year-plus practice of shooting in Britain to work around trade restrictions, and the times becoming more liberated, British filmmakers was seeking sex and violence as a way to entice people back to the cinema, which Jeffries hated. Hence the dependence on things like the Carry On films and the Hammer cycle. Jeffries was very much a man out of time. He's been quoted as saying, "I hate the 70s. I think that going to the moon was a bore. I prefer sailing to flying. I hate blue movies and violent stories. And if you ask me what I've seen to make me that way, I would say that I haven't seen any. But I've heard about them and I don't have to witness a murder to know that I don't like murder." So while remembered by his Railway Children cast and crew and other collaborators on other films as a warm, gentle and fatherly figure, he used to reward Agatha and Thompson with good takes by handing them half a crown. He also had a very strong point of view when it came to this kind of thing and saw making wholesome family films as a sort of counter-revolutionary act, hoping there was an audience out there like him, craving films the entire family could enjoy together. So finding The Railway Children, a book so lovely, wistful, nostalgic, and, yes, wholesome, while also loaded with subtext about dealing with adversity, dismantling classism and socialist notions of equality, community, and workers' rights, it was a lightning bolt moment for Jeffries, who quickly snapped up a 6-month option on the screen rights for £300 and planned to write a screenplay. He said, "I found the climate of the E. Nesbit story just right for me, a way in which to start entertaining people and help, not destroy, our industry. There are hardly any films being made for children and for the middle-aged and older age groups." Jeffries was already accustomed to rewriting his character's lines as an actor to bring them more of a comic humanity, so he figured he could tackle an entire script. And fortunately for Jeffries, he knew of a kindred spirit. In 1969, the US media conglomerate EMI had just purchased the ailing British film studio ABPC, the Amalgamated British Picture Company, which was formerly British International Pictures, who formed in the 1920s and made their name by producing most of Alfred Hitchcock's earliest films. It was rechristened ABPC, and ABPC was rechristened as EMI Films upon purchase. So they planned to make a big splash. They hired writer-director Brian Forbes, who'd found success with films like Whistle Down the Wind, The L-Shaped Room and Seance on a Wet Afternoon, to head up the New Look studio. And Forbes, similar to Jeffries, also wanted to steer modern cinema away from the sex and violence track. He announced an ambitious star-heavy slate of 14 films to be made over the company's first 18 months, in a gesture with no less an ambitious aim, but to save the UK film industry, spearheaded by family-friendly content. Although EMI would also be a distributor for Hammer, and so, that was a little compromised. So when Jeffries, who was good friends with Forbes, pitched him The Railway Children, Forbes leapt at the chance. After 2 years and 11 films, Forbes' reign was brought to an end as his tenure yielded just 2 box office hits from those 11 films, the first and biggest being The Railway Children. But while he lost the battle, EMI eventually won the war. Over the next 16 years, EMI Films would make a major cultural impact, producing such films as Monty Python and the Holy Grail, The Deer Hunter, The Elephant Man, Tender Mercies, A Passage to India, and many more, before being shuttered in 1986. I think the last film they released actively was Richard Franklin's chimpanzee horror thriller Link with Elizabeth Shue. But they also released a Pet Shop Boys film called It Couldn't Happen Here as well at that time. Now, I've done quite a bit of research on this, and I'm sure this is the case. The Railway Children was not only EMI's first hit, it was perhaps the first film produced solely under the EMI Films banner, as the first handful of EMI releases were produced under the ABPC banner, but released as EMI Films. So, yeah, this is where EMI Films kicked off, and also led to the popular home video label Thorn EMI, which we in Australia were particularly fond of. So Forbes, of course, went back to writing and directing, most notably helming William Goldman's adaptation of Ira Levin's chilling feminist horror story, The Stepford Wives, in 1975. Brian Forbes kept on directing until the end of the 1980s before transitioning into a successful career as a novelist. He passed away in 2013 at the age of 86.
What? Not secrets, Mr. Parks?
So again, with the Russian, we saw the Russian being going away earlier. Again, a form of transport being seen as a class marker and perhaps a mark of progress, with the Russian falling off a public carriage now being whisked away in a world of fine dining. And speaking of which, behind the scenes, some of the train's carriages were used as makeup trailers for the cast and crew, which is something fondly remembered by townspeople who were hanging around the set at the time.
He's got other things to keep.
So there's a feeling of the preservation of the family in this piece, which is interesting in light of Nesbit's own experience and her own experience of marriage, which was quite horrendous, and her progressive views. It feels like it comes from both the original novel and is strongly emphasised in this film version, but very much fits in with Jeffrey's vision of family values and the wholesome gentility he wished to portray. He eschewed modern filmmaking techniques and any sort of flashiness and strove for something more classical. He saw this as a risk in some ways, swimming against the tide of an increasingly permissive mainstream. He wanted to make something as honest as possible, in his words, like a Victorian documentary. So Jeffries presented the project to Forbes. It was merely his screenplay. He didn't have a director attached, but he was keen to do it himself. Forbes loved his script, thought The Railway Children was exactly the sort of film he thought EMI should be making, and asked Jeffries who he thought might make a good director. Jeffries replied, "I know it's a crazy idea and not on, but I've secretly harboured a longing to direct it myself." To Jeffries' surprise, Forbes thought this was a great idea and needed no convincing whatsoever. Jeffries said there were slight bets among the technical staff as to how long it would last, but the finished film impressed Forbes with its style and warmth.
All right, I'll look out some things that Phyllis has outgrown. Will that do?
So it's interesting, this idea here too of charity that comes in. Nesbit and Bland were incredibly charitable in their own lives, but in the book and film, there is this attitude from particularly the working class characters that's very resistant to the idea of charity, or at least being shown charity, which comes more out of pride than any sort of anti-charitable point of view. So The Railway Children was released on December 22nd, 1970, and as it happens, UK audiences concurred with Forbes's view of the film being stylish and warm, as the film became the nation's ninth biggest grossing hit of 1971, and was nominated for 3 BAFTAs. I mentioned Sally Thompson as Best Newcomer. Bernard Cribbins was also nominated for Best Supporting Actor, and Johnny Douglas's musical score was also nominated. Thompson and Cribbins both lost to cast members of Kes, the Ken Loach film, and Douglas lost to Burt Bacharach's work on Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which was the film that dominated the BAFTAs that year. I'm always fascinated how American films can dominate the BAFTAs. It's very strange to me. The Railway Children has been adapted for the screen only once more since, as I touched on earlier, as a TV movie in 2000, with Jenny Agutter returning again, but this time to play Mother, making it the 3rd screen version of the story she's appeared in and connecting her with it forever. Perks was played by an actor named Gregor Fisher, who you might recall from Love Actually as Bill Nighy's character Billy Mack's hapless manager. So the children arrive at Perks's house to give him his gifts that they'd gone through the village and solicited from everybody. So the actress playing Mrs. Perks here is a lady named Deddy Davies. She was born Gillian Davies, but christened Deddy by her theatrical colleagues due to her dedication to her roles. She was actually married to Paddy Ward, the coach driver that greeted the family upon their first arrival at Oakworth, and they remained married until his death in 2011. She hasn't starred in many movies, but she did work on Lionel Jeffrey's second released film, The Amazing Mr. Blunden, and has acted on TV and stage since the late 1960s and the mid-2010s in everything from The Bill to the Forsyte Saga to Grange Hill to Little Britain. And one of her last is The Perks Kids. She was in Matthew Walsh's excellent 2014 movie Pride, about a group of gay activists who teamed up with coal miners during a lengthy strike during the summer of 1984. Davies herself sadly passed away in 2016. I love this family in the back, just holding this naked kid like a sack of potatoes. Perks' birthday party is very faithful to the book. From the first moment, you see the pair of little feet peeking out from underneath the door of the outside toilet. to the crowded house to this sort of many children being a portrait of the working poor, but a very affectionate one. This idea of where the Perkses live, and it undercuts the children's concept of being poor because they think they're poor and their place is kind of luxurious in comparison. But there's also the way Perks reacts to the idea of charity here, and his need for dignity and respect seems to be very telling of Nesbit's left-leaning views for the working class. And it's not an anti-charity stand, but it's more this sort of feel that Perks feels offended that people know his business and think he's not being able to make ends meet and he can't run his own life. And
What's this squirrel doing on table?
Oh, Lord. Whatever shall we do? I've forgotten to put the labels on.
So as you might imagine, scoring a home run from his first time at bat at the age of 44, Jeffries was suddenly a hot property as a writer-director and immediately found himself courting a stack of projects, including a musical adaptation of Peter Pan with songs by Tim Rice and Andrew Lloyd Webber. But that and many other properties soon fell apart, and soon Jeffries directed Baxter, a story about a teenage boy struggling to overcome a speech impediment while being affected by his parents' flailing marriage. It starred Patricia Neal, Jean-Pierre Cassel, Britt Eklund, and Scott Jacoby as the title character. The film sat on the shelf for 2 years, and in the meantime, Jeffries wrote and directed The Amazing Mr. Blunden, a fantasy comedy based on Antonia Barber's novel The Ghosts, about a mysterious solicitor who leaves a woman and her children in charge of a haunted mansion, which famously cast British sex symbol Diana Dawes in a villainous role. Released in 1972, Mr. Blunden did okay business, but hardly railway children business. And when Baxter was finally released the next year, in 1973, it did even less, and Jeffries struggled to get another directing project off the ground for a few years, even returning to acting in films like Richard Lester's Royal Flash and Sidney Hayes' What Changed Charlie Farthing. Finally, after 5 years out of the director's chair, Jeffries returned with 1978's Wombling Free, the live-action feature adaptation of the popular BBC animated series The Wombles, which was narrated by Perks himself, Bernard Cribbins, who also lent his voice to Jeffries' film. Sadly, the film didn't catch on as much as the books and series it was based on, and was a surprise flop. Jeffries quickly found a follow-up in the animated live-action hybrid The Water Babies, released the same year and starring James Mason, Billy Whitelaw, and again, Bernard Cribbins. Look here,
We'll go if you like.
In a family adventure about a child falling into an underwater world ruled by a shark and an eel. But this aquatic fantasy sunk without a trace, and Jeffries' career as a director of Surefire Family Fare, which opened the decade so promisingly, was now finished in a 1-2 punch. Jeffries returned to acting, but never directed again.
You wrote down everything everybody said when they gave us the things with the people's names on. Because Mother said that we ought to be careful.
So the children wanted to do something nice for Perks. He rejects it thinking it's charity, but eventually the kids convince him it's gifts given out of love and respect. And again, there's this idea from Nesbit of salvation through community. And actually, Cribbins stepped into the shoes of the Perks character, speaking of salvation, one more time on a short BBC radio play in 2013 called The Saving of Albert Perks. It's readily accessible on the BBC website, which is a 13-minute monologue set in the 1940s, finding Perks still working at Oakworth Station, reuniting with an adult widowed Bobbie, who steps off the train joined by 2 Jewish refugee children who have escaped Nazi Germany on the Kinder transport. Perks tells us this story, and as well as finding out the fates of the Waterbury family as told to him by Roberta, and what's going on with the war and trying to rescue these kids. It's really lovely and worth a listen. Despite being diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2009, Cribbins is still alive and well and going strong. He turns 93 this year and only just retired from acting in 2018 at the ripe age of 90.
How fond everybody is of you.
So he's had quite an incredible career, and other than the kids, is, I believe, the only surviving cast member of the film.
Stop!
So Jeffries' directing career might have been over, but his acting career was about to hit a new phase. It's also worth mentioning that Jeffries' parents, again, he had this sort of Roman Catholic background. His parents were both Salvation Army social workers, deeply religious. And while he was proud of his family, particularly his influential Salvationist grandfather, Charles H. Jeffries, Lionel Jeffries' father was said to regularly beat and mentally torment him. And it's been speculated that Jeffries, beyond his own personal religious and social beliefs, was also attracted to making wholesome family films for children, and especially the railway children, as it gave him the opportunity to capture the idyllic childhood he never had himself, which is kind of heartbreaking. So while Jeffries had always seen himself as a film actor, he was lured back to television in 1980, now that the directing jobs had dried up, for a role in a Dennis Potter teleplay called Clouds in My Coffee, starring alongside Dame Peggy Ashcroft as an aging couple looking back on their life together. And he found the experience so satisfying and the production values so surprisingly high that Jeffries pretty much abandoned movies for the rest of his life. He only appeared in 2 more films, showing up for his friends Brian Forbes in Better Late Than Never and Michael Winner in A Chorus of Disapproval. He embraced the small screen with open arms for the rest of his career, working in TV for the next 20 years, including taking a lead in a sitcom Tom, Dick and Harriet, albeit in a role that nearly killed him when a stunt involving driving a car into a river almost drowned him. I love this. I love how she clambers over the bed to get in bed with him. There's lots of really nice touches in Debbie Davies' performance, and that's the thing with Jeffries and this film. Every actor, he clearly has a great deal of warmth toward the entire cast, and every actor gets a moment to do something fun or distinguish themselves or play off the other performer. And it's a rather nice showcase, even in the smallest of roles, which is part of his remit in casting friends and people he admired. So now we're about to see one of the rare divergences from the book, one of the racier moments you'll see in this film, illustrating, it's a cheeky peek at Perks and his wife's happy marital relationship. As it's your birthday. So Mr. and Mrs. Perks behind the curtain, about to have a nice time. It's very, very cheeky, but again, very, very sweet and wholesome. So another moment that's been altered from the book is the kids here in the book, they're planting their own little gardens, and Bobbie and Peter, who have been so very good around Mother to this point by not arguing, and Bobbie being incredibly sensitive to her mother's needs and running interference and trying to get around arguing with her brother and sister as she can see her mother's mood is deteriorating. Suddenly they get, Bobbie and Peter get into an argumentative tug of war over a rake, and the ensuing struggle ends up with said rake piercing Peter's foot, leading him to be laid up in bed convalescing. And Bobbie, being Bobbie, feeling she was probably wrong in the argument and responsible for Peter's injury, goes to Perks to get some magazines. And one of them has the very article that she's about to discover. Obviously, Jeffries has removed that vignette for time and economy, instead having Perks bring the magazines for their mother, as we don't need to see Peter laid up in bed for 5 to 10 minutes, particularly as we're going to see someone else laid up in bed very soon.
That was very kind of him.
And Jeffries here has the rainfall coming down. A slightly melodramatic moment where Bobbie discovers this article here, which reveals her father's verdict. Five-year sentence as the rain begins any second now to spat on the paper like tears, underscoring the gravity of Bobbie's discovery. Again, it's a melodramatic touch, but I think it works really well. So with Jeffrey's going back to acting. Yeah, so he took a lead in a sitcom in the early 80s, almost immediately after discovering that he liked acting for television. And yes, he performed a stunt in the sitcom Tom, Dick and Harriet that nearly killed him, involving driving a car into a river, and he almost drowned and wound up suing Thames Television over it. But while his success on TV never came close to matching that of his film career, he did work consistently in television until 2001. Sadly, after suffering from vascular dementia throughout the 2000s, Jeffries died in 2010, aged 83. But his career is amazing for many reasons, not least because it's broken into three very distinct phases. He got star movie character actor from the 50s and 60s, family filmmaker from the 70s, and TV character actor in the 80s and 90s. So here's the point here. Bobbie finding out about her father and that beautiful reveal, just not saying anything, just turning it over and showing her mother, heralds the end of her childhood. This is where her innocence kind of begins to end. And in the book, as in the film, from this moment on, she becomes her mother's much-needed confidant.
Because it's not true. They have shut him in prison, but he's done nothing wrong.
And again, this is the explanation of father's situation that refers to the Dreyfus affair of a government operative, a government employee being convicted of treason and selling state secrets and then getting off. And getting off by the film's end might seem unlikely to a modern audience, but the sort of 5-year term and suddenly being acquitted was something that actually happened with Dreyfus.
With being, in fact, a spy and a traitor.
How could anyone believe that? How could anyone do that?
And it's this thing with Nesbit's book as well, is the mother and father and the kids, like everyone in the film is wonderful. Like there's no villains. The closest thing to a villain is the unseen person who set father up. Everyone in this film is good and honest, and, they might have their moments of impetuousness or stubbornness or argumentativeness, but they're all basically good people.
Why didn't you explain all that to someone? No one would listen. Do you suppose I haven't tried everything? No, my darling. What we have to do, you and I, and Daddy, is to be brave.
So again, this is Bobbie learning this is what adulthood means. Being brave, being stoic, particularly in that sort of English sense. So here, the distance between Bobbie and her siblings is now highlighted as Phyllis lies sleeping blissfully, while Bobbie is still up writing a letter to the old gentleman, working to try and release her father. In the middle of the night. Or late morning. And delivering the letter to Perks. This beautiful score, it must be mentioned, is from the composer Johnny Douglas, who was someone who had a thriving career as a pianist and arranger and a music publisher before coming to movies.
Oh, please yourself.
There's going to be a paper chase tomorrow.
Whoopee!
So here again is Bobbie very much assuming the mother role now, keeping the details from them, keeping it fun for them, keeping the spirits up. We can't tell you why, let's make it a game. It's very much something their mother would have done for them. So, Johnny Douglas's debut score was in 1961's Touch of Death, although he'd been a musician for many years before that. He worked on the score for the sci-fi classic Day of the Triffids, scored 1965's Crack in the World, among other films. But this remains his most beloved and famous of his film scores. So this here is a paper chase, which is a peculiar custom of turn-of-the-century English life. One kid, known as the Hare, runs, dropping paper, while the other kids, known as hounds, chase him, following his paper trail. Presumably it's like an extended game of chasey or tag, and they're meant to catch him. Here come the hounds. So composer Johnny Douglas only scored one more film after this, Dulcimer in 1971, which was also one of Brian Forbes' initial EMI slate of films. But throughout his career, he wrote musical arrangements for everyone from Shirley Bassey to Barbra Streisand to Vera Lynn to Max Bygraves to Frankie Howard to Harry Seacom and even El Martino, Johnny Fontaine himself. He also opened his own record label in 1983, Dulcimer Records, named for the last film he scored, specialising in easy listening music with various musicians and his own orchestra. They released some of his own scores as well, the most popular of which was, of course, The Railway Children. But Douglas's career took an interesting turn in the early 1980s when he became the house composer at Marvel Entertainment, who was specialising in Saturday morning cartoons at that point. So if you're a Gen X kid like me, Johnny Douglas's themes are likely baked into your DNA, and not just because of The Railway Children. Given he scored the themes and scores for shows like Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, The Incredible Hulk, Dungeons and Dragons, My Little Pony, G.I. Joe, Pandemonium, and my personal favourite, The Transformers. Most recently, 2 tracks on Kylie Minogue's 2003 album Body Language, Red-Blooded Woman and Chocolate, were also based on compositions by the Railway Children's composer, Johnny Douglas. So that's unexpected.
There, that's all. What should we do now?
So
Not yet. There's one in the red jersey. He hasn't come out yet.
here we're about to see them go into the tunnel. Now, the tunnel is another reason that this location was chosen. It's shorter than it appears in the film. It's been maximised with the use of movie magic. But as I mentioned earlier, the Keighley and Worth railway line was chosen for the film because it was one of the few heritage railway lines still intact. And it was one of the few that had a tunnel, which is vital to the sequence we're about to see. As the hound, known as Jim, is trapped with a broken leg inside the tunnel and the kids have to rescue him.
I still don't like
The tunnel is called the Mytholms Tunnel and the Mytholms Tunnel. I'm not sure how it's pronounced, but it's Mytholms Tunnel. And it has been used in a few films, most notably in darkly iconic fashion by director Alan Parker in Pink Floyd The Wall. For the famous brick in the wall sequence, when Pink is hiding in the tunnel and the train goes past, with all the weird spud-faced kids being carted off to school. The surrounding town of Haworth was used by Francis Lee, most recently in his film God's Own Country from 2017, and it's also famous as the home of the Bronte sisters. So now, much like Pink in Pink Floyd The Wall, they all stand against the tunnel as the train goes by. Is Jim going to get his leg out of the way in time? Or is the Railway Children suddenly going to take a grisly turn? Safe. You see the cut there. There's the green engine coming through again. And there's Phyllis, seeing the train as a dragon. She always thought it was.
Well, come on. Supposing that boy was caught underneath the train. Oh!
We've got to go and see.
Can't we go and get some more?
So
Phil, you wait here.
No.
the boy here, Jim, is played by an actor named Christopher Whitty, who is besides Agatha, is the only other holdover from the 1968 Railway Children television show. He played Jim in that as well. Not that much is known about him and why he was involved. Presumably, Jeffries liked him in the show and thought he might be good for this. So, The Railway Children was adapted for radio in the early 1940s and then 4 times for television, as mentioned. But this is regarded as the most unilaterally popular version of all. It was voted the 66th best British film of the 20th century in a poll by the British Film Institute, the BFI, who surveyed 1,000 people from the world of British film and television. And it also squeezed in at number 99 in Time Out magazine's list of the best British films made up to 2011. Again, polling 150 film and TV professionals. So, this film does have a massive esteem in the UK, perhaps because it evokes this fondness for an England past, one more genteel, one before the World Wars, a period of relative peacetime, because the English were always at war with somebody, with lots of elements of the steam age in here. as well as steam trains and engines, there's paraffin lamps and zoetropes and puppet shows and simple pleasures. And it's perhaps a world that perhaps never really existed outside of storybooks and cinema, but one which holds a powerful nostalgic sway over audiences regardless, especially English audiences, as it emerged in the early 1970s as a counterpoint to increasingly dark films in complex times. I think it's continued to endure for those reasons for subsequent audiences. Something that's just wholesome and just so darn sweet, and that has a love for all of its characters and this very handmade kind of feel.
From one of his patients, and that man's come to tell her. Nonsense. Mother wouldn't take the man into Jim's bed.
But it's...
Listen. The door's opening.
So now the kids again shut out, but trying to find out what's happening, who's this visitor to their house. But again, it's more brightly lit this time. It's not dark and brown and as closed in.
Jim's has come. He wants to see you. Wash your hands and faces. We'll be in the dining room when you're ready.
Yes, Mama.
There now. Fancy not thinking of that, hmm? Any hot water, Mrs. Viney?
Right, old love.
So the kids are intrigued as to who Jim's relative is. Getting freshened up, and it's the old gentleman. So I mentioned here that this actor his name was William Mervyn. He made his West End debut in the mid-40s, movie debut soon after, but he became most famous in the UK in the early 1960s for a TV show called The Odd Man, where he played a pompous police detective in several series from 1960 to 1963. And then the long-running courtroom drama Crown Court. And in the early 70s, he was in a church set sitcom called All Gas and Gaiters on the BBC, which was quite a hit and made a star out of Derek Nimmo and caught some flack at the time in England for making fun of the church. Probably set the table for Monty Python to come in and wreak havoc. Mervyn here was a frequent supporting actor in films like Circus of Horrors, Hammerhead, Deadlier Than the Male, Salt and Pepper, with Sammy Davis Jr. and Peter Lawford, The Ruling Class with Peter O'Toole, and Carry On Again, Doctor. He's another Carry On alumni. And that film also featured the actress who played Ruth, Anne Lancaster. So William Mervyn here continued to act on film, stage and TV until his death in 1976 at the age of 64. And once again, we have this theme of a community that's created nourishing each other. So the old gentleman has been a help in terms of finding about father, locating the Russian family, and now the family is have inadvertently paid him back by taking in his grandson. And he's now paying mother to take care of him as well as take care of the grandson, as well as breaking the news to Bobbie that maybe he might have a circuit breaker regarding her father's plight. And it might be some very good news on the way.
I'm perfectly certain he didn't.
So the film cinematographer Arthur Ibbotson started under cinematographer Ronald Neame on David Lean films. Neame left Lean to direct his own movies, but Ibbotson stayed on, acting as a camera assistant on films like Brief Encounter and Great Expectations, until Neame tapped Ibbotson to be his director of photography on The Horse's Mouth in 1958, which was the first of 5 collaborations between Neame and Ibbotson. Tunes of Glory, I Could Go On Singing, The Chalk Garden, and finally Hopscotch in 1980, which was a spy caper with Walter Matthau.
Yes, I know.
Ibbotson also shot for Basil Dearden on The League of Gentlemen and Brian Forbes from Whistle Down the Wind. So he's obviously very in demand among a lot of the UK's best directors of the 1960s. He also shot Where Eagles Dare and the 1969 period epic Anne of the Thousand Days, for which he was nominated for an Oscar right before he started shooting this. His film directly after The Railway Children was Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, which was an eye-popping feast of colours indeed. And here, of course, is another form of Edwardian entertainment, the puppet show, albeit a chaotic one performed by the Waterbury kids. I love this frame. The kids are already bored with their new toy. It's like the Edwardian Breakfast Club.
Children, will you please be quiet?
And now the doctor has come to
Goodness.
release Jim's healed leg.
Can I have that,
There we are. How's that? Cheerio.
Right.
Jim's leg got better and he went home.
So the children say farewell to Jim. There's a lot in the book with Peter wanting Jim to stay on because having another male around the house, which isn't really focused on here. Instead, though, we do get something that's not in the book, which is this moment here, which is a handhold, Jim promising to write.
You're lovely, Pete. They'll have to marry now.
They'll have to marry now. So I guess because Bobbie's younger in the book, we don't really see that. But here, again, it's denoting the last steps out of childhood and into womanhood for Bobbie. The feeling that things are on the precipice of change for her.
I wonder if the railway misses us. We never go and see
There's
it.
another push-in shot again, this realisation of the kids that this time is a kind of this, the encroaching camera is like this realisation, this creeping realisation that this time is about to end.
Going tomorrow.
But, you know, they should check out the train one last time. It's almost like, for old time's sake, let's say hi to the train and the station because it nourished us for so long and we haven't been there. So, cinematographer Arthur Ibbotson continued to shoot throughout the 1970s and 80s, shooting films like 11 Harrow House, The Medusa Touch, The Prisoner of Zenda, The Bounty for Roger Donaldson, and his final feature as DOP was Santa Claus the Movie with the Salkins in 1986. That same year, he also shot the telemovie Babes in Toyland, starring Drew Barrymore and Keanu Reeves, before retiring. Ibbotson died of cancer a decade later in 1997, aged 75. So here comes their old friend, the Express, and everyone is waving because the old gentleman has spread the good news, which they don't know yet. Things are indeed about to change for the Railway Children, and the better. But there is also this bittersweet feeling that their idyllic time in Three Chimneys and Oakworth Station and the railway, this magical little world they've found and managed to create for themselves,
Most extraordinary.
is about to be left behind.
Now, Bobbie,
So here's the kids receiving a bit of homeschool. This is one of the rare times that they're seen doing something that isn't kind of playing or just helping out around the house. I read a review once saying the kids seem to be unburdened by any sort of school or obligation, which is part of the charm, part of the attraction for kids, I guess, not having to go to school. So again, this little moment here is also underscores the mother-daughter confidant relationship. Bobbie's feeling weird, a bit sad and melancholy, but there's something she doesn't quite know. Her mother is vibing on that and feeling it. And they're both wearing the same shade of blue on the dresses, seeing them side by side. Even the pattern on Bobbie's cloak is similar to the pattern on Mother's collar. And this is kind of Bobbie now really growing into adulthood, assuming that secondary mother role to the family. But also, given what's about to occur, she'll move beyond that secondary mother role to that of an independent adult at the conclusion of this.
This is the train, it'll be smart work. God bless you, my dear. I've seen it in the papers.
So here is the classic scene this film is remembered for.
No offence, I know on a day like this.
And again, the green on Perks's vest and the green of her hat. And
Taking too great a liberty, have it on a day like this, you know.
No, Mr. Perks. Of course it's not a liberty.
No.
Dear Mr. Perks, we love you quite as
everybody's
much.
preserving the surprise.
But on a day like what?
Well, like this here. I told you I seen it in the papers, didn't I? I told you.
So what in the papers?
Oakworth!
I think the film is endured because it has these layers, this rich tradition of early 20th century children's literature, this And this finding magic in the everyday, kids getting on through adversity, making an adventure out of it, but also this genteel wholesomeness that never feels prudish or didactic or moralistic. There's layers of morals there. But, it's all about kids growing up, and there's the layer, again, under that of Nesbit's socialist politics and notions of family finding strength through community, of embracing others and being embraced and finding strength in it. And I think that's one of the main reasons why this film endures as it does. So now we hear Johnny Douglas's haunting theme coming in over the top. I love the way Jeffries draws this out, really prolongs it. Everyone's off the train, this puff of smoke and emerging. His father free. And here's the classic line, which is identified with this film.
Daddy, my daddy!
And for a moment again, Roberta is a child being picked up off her feet. And green, there's a frame is awash in green. Now, there's a freeze frame there, which is curious because there's only 2 freeze frames in the entire movie. Both involve father arriving. The first one is when he arrives home and when we first see him at the start of the film, putting his arms up, and then at the end of the film, arriving home. And the 2 shots virtually bookend the film. And these shots are just, awash in green. It's as if, in case you thought green as this film's colour of joy was some sort of accident, no, it is utterly, completely intentional. I mean, look at that. Agatha says, everyone talks about the moment when she runs down the platform crying, my daddy, my daddy. She said she was supposed to post-sync the sound after filming, but because she was out of breath and the steam from the train was hissing, it was impossible to capture the same sound in the studio. And Lionel Jeffries, being a perfectionist and wanting that kind of reality, in the end, he just cleaned up the original soundtrack and used that, which is really cool, which is why it probably has that echo, because it was taken on set. And so I like this. It's like, let's not go in there. Let's let mum and dad have some alone time. They've got some things they want to say to each other as they head out to the green field.
I think just now we're not wanted there. Not for a few minutes, anyway. I think it would be best for us to go quickly and quietly.
This final idyllic shot.
Among the thin gold spikes of grass.
A final look at Ben's farm.
We may just take one last look over our shoulders at the house where neither we nor anyone else is wanted now.
So speaking of community coming together, what better way than to end the movie like this? Breaking this idea of everyone waving at us. Breaking the fourth wall is interesting here too. There seems to be a suggestion that you've been through this journey, through this adventure with us, and now you're part of our family. And it sort of shows that it takes a community to make a film, as it takes a community to flourish, as the community in the film does. Just mention the art director John Clark had this amazing career as well. He only worked in film for about 10 years, but worked on films like Performance and Tommy and this and the Elizabeth Taylor vehicles Boom and Secret Ceremony. Had this most incredible filmography and then retired from the film industry to become an architect. At some point during this end credit sequence, someone says thank you, Mr. Forbes, as well, acknowledging the studio chief. And everything about this just feels, again, it caps off the film as feeling lovingly handmade. So I hope you've enjoyed this journey through the Railway Children. Thank you all for listening. And as ever, we shall leave the final word to Jenny Agatha.